next to us is the brand new 1250.
Yeah.
It's taken a long time to go from the 1200 to the 1250.
A long time.
So let's start with what's new, and that is, of course, the power plant. Let's walk through that.
Sure. Okay, so the 1250 motor, of course, we're talking about more horsepower and more torque, which is usually the goal of any manufacturer when they try to go change motors, to give you more horsepower and more torque. But there's two other things that BMW wanted with this motor that are very difficult to get when you raise the horsepower and torque, and that is emissions and fuel economy, and on the other end is controllability. And what they did in order to achieve that is they introduced the new shift cam. And what the shift cam is it's a intake cam that shifts between a partial load of basically opening the intake valves at a fraction of their normal opening space. When you roll on the throttle, the cam shifts and it opens the valves open full. And what that gives you is at low speed handling, and when you're riding the bike really low and you're not getting really hard on the throttle, you'll notice the bike is a lot smoother. Has really good fuel economy. It's got a deeper thrum to its sound. And you'll find, especially riding off-road, the bike is really manageable in off-road environments, especially when you're doing things when you have to have a very light touch on the clutch and throttle and you're maneuvering around. The bike wants to keep going, keeps chugging along. And then when you roll on the throttle, the shift cam shifts over to the high position, and you get a very aggressive acceleration, a lot of power. Feels really good.
What else is new on the bike? I see that the headers are a little bit different from the old outgoing bike.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you can see that physically the shift cam here, the valve cover is different to denote the new shift cam. But the exhaust manifold where it attaches here is different as well. So it attaches the same spot, but in the past it swooped out way out over here and came back. And now you see it's almost vertical. It comes almost straight down and back. And the reason they did that is for EU compliance. And making sure that emissions compliance is met. And the goal ultimately is they want the catalytic converter to heat up faster. And by making the exhaust headers a little shorter, and it creates a more direct line to the catalytic converter, makes it heat up a little quicker.
Now, of course, you've got the new HFT, right?
Yeah, so the Tft Display is a graphic interface that shows you what, of course, speed and RPMs and this sort of thing. And what's happening now is the amount of electronic on motorcycles, whether it be traction control or throttle response or anti-lock brakes or suspension damping and preload, those are all becoming much more sophisticated, and they're all becoming programmable, customizable. And having a TFT display is really nice because in addition to showing you all that data, when you're going to make adjustments to how the bike rides to your personal preference, the TFT shows you the data and it tells you in detail what's happening when you make those changes, what you can expect to feel. And this is something that's really difficult to do with analog displays.
And of course, this is an interesting button, right? The ride mode.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what kind of ride modes you get with this bike.
So the bike comes with, if you have the what's called the Ride Modes Pro option on the bike,
yep, you
get 5 different modes. You get rain mode, which is really good for a day like today when you have a very low traction environment. And in rain mode, the throttle response and the suspension and the traction control and ABS are all tuned for low traction. As you scroll through the modes, you go from rain mode to a road mode to a dynamic mode, which gives you more aggressive riding characteristics. And then it has 2 off-road modes, Enduro and Enduro Pro. And in the off-road modes, the bike retunes itself for an off-road riding environment, which is quite a bit different than street. And if you go between Enduro and Enduro Pro, you get more aggressive version of that riding mode. So you can do more aggressive things like lofting the bike over obstacles and locking up the rear tire and making the rear end drift and skid around. Enduro Pro allows for that.
There are 2 bikes, right? There's a GS and a GSA.
Yes.
And the biggest difference is you've got a bigger fuel tank on the GSA.
Yeah, that's right. So there's quite a few differences between the two. The GS Adventure comes stock with a lot of things that are optional on the standard GS, like spoked wheels, engine protection bars, a bigger windscreen, this sort of thing. But the big thing is the gas tank.
I think there's one over there, right?
No.
That's the old one.
There is one here.
Is there one here?
Yeah, there's one right over there. Yeah.
Let's show them the GSA,
Sure.
the Adventure. Might as well if it's here.
Yeah, it's here. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the protection on it already.
Yeah, so you can see here the engine protection bars, which is something you can put on a standard GS, of course, but it comes with the GS Adventure. The GS Adventure's got a bigger windscreen. It's got additional wind deflection characteristics. It comes stock with a lot of things that might be optional on a standard GS, like the cross-spoked tubeless wheels, which you can get on a standard GS, but they don't come with them. But the big difference is the gas tank. This is 7.9 gallons versus 5.3.
What's the range on that?
So realistically, a standard GS you can get up to about 220 miles. This will get you over 300 miles of range.
That's a lot of range.
It's quite a bit.
Yeah,
and that's why you choose one of the over others. Really comes down to the gas tank.
Of course, the GS has always been known for having shaft drive, and it's still a shaft drive.
Still shaft drive, yeah.
That hasn't changed. Anything else on the bike that's changed that's different?
So there's two new electronic elements that have come with this bike. One is called dynamic braking control. And what that does is, in the event that you're riding and this typically happens in a panic situation where you've got your hand on the throttle and you've got it rolled on and something scares you, and especially newer riders will reach out and apply the brake without rolling off the throttle. So now you've got these two elements working against each other. And what dynamic braking control does is, if you've got the throttle on and you apply the front brake, the bike will roll off the throttle for you.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then the other difference between this and its predecessor is what's called hill start control. And hill start control is a feature we've had for a few years, and the way it works is, if you're on an incline, you can stop the bike and double tap the front brake and it will apply the rear and hold you there. With Hill Start Control Pro, now the bike senses you're on an incline and will stop itself and hold itself there.
It's a heavy bike, it's close to 600 pounds.
Yeah.
And you ride it a lot off-road. What's kind of the trick to riding such a big and heavy bike off-road?
Yeah, there's a very important element to that, and that is absolutely technique.
Yeah.
The biggest problem I find as an instructor is that people that take these bikes off-road ride them like a street bike. If you ride like a street bike, it's not fun. They feel cumbersome and awkward. If you use off-road riding technique, then the bike becomes very light and very manageable.
So what does that mean? Give me an example.
So one of the biggest mistakes people make when they take this bike off-road is that they sit down. And when you're sitting down on the bike is moving laterally and you're trying to control that movement while sitting. If you stand up with your feet on the pegs, you're able to much more acutely adjust for the movement of the bike. And not only that, but it's instinctual. Just standing, you make little minor adjustments from foot to keep yourself balanced. The same thing occurs here when you learn to stand up and ride properly.
Now the great thing about a GS is that it is basically an overgrown dirt bike. It's incredibly smooth. The horizontally opposed engine puts all that weight down low. And now with BMW's version of variable valve timing, it's much easier to just kind of have it putt along at this speed. All that torque, all that weight at the bottom of this bike is great for the center of gravity. Now in this loose stuff, it's a little bit scary because you've got this 600-pound bike that's basically doing its own thing. And the trick to riding a GS, I think, is just loose. Let the bike work. And you kind of stand up and then let it do all the hard stuff.
So, we've got two bikes here. Behind you, we've got the new 1250, and we've got the GS8. What's your favorite? Like a GS kind of guy.
It's so.
I'm saying that because
yeah, and I love RTs. They're great, but it feels really good to be riding along on the asphalt and having a great time and see a dirt road cascading off into the heavens and go, I want to see where that goes. And this is the bike that can do it. So if you've got aspirations for going off-road, the GS is great. If you're more of a street acclimated person, the RT is really nice and it's got a lot more street based creature comforts.